The early morning sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon as Staff Sergeant James Cooper pulled his old blue pickup truck into the empty parking lot at Miller's Dock. It was 5:30 a.m., and the autumn air was crisp and cool. James liked coming to this spot early, before anyone else arrived. After spending 4 tours in Afghanistan, he had learned to appreciate these quiet moments of peace. James was 34 years old, but his eyes looked older. They had seen things that most people couldn't imagine. His strong, lean frame moved with the quiet confidence of a trained soldier as he gathered his fishing gear from the truck bed. He was wearing simple clothes today, worn blue jeans, a gray t-shirt, and his favorite olive green jacket that still had his Army Rangers patch on the sleeve. The wooden dock creaked softly under his boots as he walked to his favorite spot at the far end. James had discovered this fishing spot 3 months ago, shortly after returning home from his last tour. He had been having trouble sleeping, like many soldiers do after coming back from war zones. His therapist had suggested finding a peaceful hobby, and fishing had always been something he enjoyed as a kid. Setting down his tackle box and folding chair, James took a moment to breathe in the morning air. The lake was like glass, perfectly still except for the occasional ripple from a jumping fish. A family of ducks glided silently across the water, and somewhere in the distance, an early morning bird called out to greet the day. James began his fishing preparation with the same methodical precision he had learned in the military. He arranged his gear neatly: hooks, lines, different types of bait, and his thermos of hot black coffee. His movements were careful and organized, a habit that had saved his life more than once in Afghanistan. While setting up his fishing rod, James thought about his team from the Rangers. He had led 12 men in his last tour, and thanks to their training and his leadership, all of them had made it home. He still kept in touch with most of them through weekly video calls. They were more than just fellow soldiers, they were brothers. The first cast of his line made a satisfying splash in the water. James settled into his chair, feeling the tension in his shoulders start to ease. This was why he loved coming here. On the dock, he didn't have to be Staff Sergeant Cooper, a decorated Army Ranger who had led countless missions. Here, he could just be James, a guy enjoying a peaceful morning of fishing. A light mist was rising from the lake's surface as the sun climbed higher. James took a sip of his coffee and watched as his line cut a gentle arc through the water. His mind drifted to the events that had led him to this moment. After 15 years in the Army Rangers, he had seen and done enough for several lifetimes. Now, he was working as a military consultant and training instructor, helping prepare the next generation of soldiers. The first fish of the day tugged at his line just as the sun fully cleared the horizon. It wasn't a big catch, just a medium-sized bass, but James smiled as he carefully unhooked it and released it back into the lake. He had never been one to keep what he caught. The fishing itself was what brought him peace. As he rebaited his hook, James noticed a few early morning joggers passing by on the trail near the parking lot. They waved, and he nodded back politely. The locals had grown used to seeing him here in the early mornings. Some even called him the Ranger in friendly greeting, though few knew the full extent of his military background. Little did James know that this peaceful morning was about to be shattered. The quiet sanctuary he had found at Miller's Dock was about to become the scene of a confrontation that would remind everyone why it was never wise to underestimate a trained soldier, especially one who just wanted to be left alone. The peaceful morning at Miller's Dock lasted until 7:45 a.m. That's when the first rumble of motorcycle engines echoed across the lake. James Cooper's hand paused mid-cast as the sound grew louder. After years in combat zones, he had developed a natural instinct for approaching trouble. 6 motorcycles roared into the parking lot, their chrome pipes gleaming in the morning sun. The bikes were large, custom-made machines with skull designs and dark paint jobs. The riders were members of a local group called the Steel Demons, known for causing trouble in the surrounding towns. The group's leader was a massive man they called Crusher. He stood about 6'4" and weighed close to 300 pounds, with a scraggly beard and arms covered in tattoos. His leather vest was decorated with patches, showing he was the president of the Steel Demons. As he dismounted his bike, he pulled out a beer from the saddlebag, cracking it open despite the early hour. The other 5 bikers followed their leader's example. They were a rough-looking bunch, all wearing leather vests covered in patches and chains. 2 of them carried small portable speakers, and soon heavy metal music was blasting across the previously quiet fishing spot. Their loud laughter and cursing echoed across the water, scaring away the ducks and any chance of catching fish. James remained calm at his spot on the dock, but his military training had already kicked in. Without making it obvious, he had counted the men, noted their positions, and identified potential weapons, mostly chains and what looked like brass knuckles in one man's back pocket. It was a habit that had kept him and his team alive in Afghanistan. From his position, James could hear their conversation. They were already half-drunk from a party the night before, and they were bragging about a fight they'd started at a bar in the next town. Crusher was particularly loud, boasting about how he had thrown a man through a window. The noise and disruption had driven away the few other morning visitors to the dock. A couple who had been setting up their fishing gear quickly packed up and left. An elderly man walking his dog turned around as soon as he saw the bikers. Soon, James was the only other person remaining in the area. It didn't take long for the bikers to notice him. Crusher pointed him out to his friends, making a joke about the lonely fisherman that made his gang laugh. They began throwing their empty beer cans, trying to see who could get closest to where James was sitting. One can splashed into the water just a few feet from his fishing line. "Hey, look at this guy," Crusher called out, his voice thick with mockery. "Doesn't he know this is our spot now?" The other bikers laughed, encouraged by their leader's taunting. Two of the younger bikers started walking down the dock, intentionally making it shake with their heavy boots. They were passing James's truck in the parking lot when one of them noticed the Army Ranger sticker on his bumper. The man elbowed his friend and pointed it out, but they just smirked, too drunk and arrogant to recognize the warning sign it represented. James remained seated, his posture relaxed but alert. His years of combat experience had taught him to stay calm in tense situations. He knew that showing fear or anger would only encourage them. Instead, he slowly began to reel in his fishing line, his movements deliberate and controlled. The morning sun now highlighted the dock clearly, casting long shadows of the approaching bikers across the wooden planks. The heavy metal music continued to blast from their speakers, mixing with their loud laughter and crude jokes. The peaceful fishing spot had been transformed into what felt like a powder keg, just waiting for a spark. What the Steel Demons didn't realize was that they had just made a serious mistake. The quiet man at the end of the dock wasn't just any fisherman looking for a peaceful morning. He was a highly trained combat veteran who had faced down much worse threats than a group of drunk bikers, and his patience was starting to wear thin. The two younger bikers reached James first, standing on either side of his chair. One of them, wearing a denim vest with torn sleeves, kicked at James's bait container, making the worms inside squirm. The other one, sporting a bandana and multiple face piercings, took a long drink from his beer before speaking. "Hey, old-timer," the one with the bandana said. "Didn't you hear? This is a private dock now. Steel Demons only." His breath reeked of stale beer and cigarettes as he leaned down closer to James's face. James continued his calm movements, securing his fishing line and placing his rod carefully beside his chair. His voice was quiet but clear when he spoke. "This is public property, gentlemen. There's plenty of room for everyone to enjoy it peacefully." This response brought a burst of laughter from the other bikers who were now making their way down the dock. Crusher led them, his heavy footsteps making the wooden planks creak dangerously. Empty beer cans clattered around his feet as he walked. "Peacefully?" Crusher mocked, his voice carrying across the water. "Did you hear that, boys? This guy wants peace." The group laughed again, forming a loose circle around James's chair. "What's the matter, friend? Don't you like a little excitement in your morning?" James remained seated, but his eyes were constantly moving, tracking each biker's position. His military training had taught him to always be aware of his surroundings. He noticed how the wooden dock had only one way out, now blocked by the bikers. He also noted the depth of the water on either side, roughly 8 feet deep, information that might become useful. One of the bikers picked up James's thermos of coffee and took a drink without asking. He immediately spat it out. "No whiskey in this coffee. What kind of fisherman are you?" He threw the thermos into the lake, where it landed with a splash. James watched his thermos sink, his face showing no emotion. Inside, though, he was calculating distances and angles, just as he had done countless times in combat situations. His muscles were loose but ready, prepared for whatever might come next. Crusher moved closer, intentionally stepping on James's tackle box. The sound of breaking plastic and crunching fishing gear cut through the morning air. "Oops," he said with a cruel smile. "Looks like your fishing day is over, buddy. Unless..." He pulled out his wallet and made a show of counting some bills. Maybe you can pay a dock usage fee? Let's say $200? The other bikers grinned at their leader's suggestion. This wasn't the first time they had pulled this routine on unsuspecting people. Usually, their victims would either pay up or run away, but James did neither. Instead, he stood up slowly, his movements smooth and controlled. At his full height, he wasn't as tall as Crusher, but there was something about his posture that made a couple of the bikers take a step back. His eyes, which had seemed tired earlier, now held the focused intensity that came from years of combat experience. "I'm going to give you all one chance," James said calmly, looking each biker in the eye. "Walk away now. Go enjoy your morning somewhere else." His voice wasn't loud or threatening, but it carried the unmistakable authority of someone used to giving orders in life-or-death situations. For a moment, there was silence except for the heavy metal music still playing from the parking lot. Even the lake seemed to grow still, as if nature itself was holding its breath. A few of the younger bikers glanced uncertainly at each other, picking up on something in James's demeanor that their alcohol-clouded minds couldn't quite process. But Crusher, either too drunk or too proud to recognize the warning signs, just laughed. He cracked his knuckles and moved even closer to James, using his size to try to intimidate. "Or what, fish boy? What exactly do you think you're going to do?" The tension on the dock had reached its breaking point. James knew that the next few moments would determine how this situation would end. And while he had hoped for a peaceful morning of fishing, his combat-trained mind was already preparing for what would come next. Crusher made his first big mistake when he reached out to grab James's shirt. His meaty hand never made it. With speed that surprised everyone on the dock, James stepped aside, letting Crusher's momentum carry him forward into empty air. "Last warning," James said quietly, his voice carrying the same tone he had used when warning his squad about hidden dangers in Afghanistan. "Take your friends and leave." The big biker's face turned red with anger and embarrassment. Nobody had ever made him look foolish in front of his gang before. He spun around, less steady on his feet now, and pulled out a set of brass knuckles from his back pocket. "You're dead, fish boy," Crusher roared, sliding the brass knuckles onto his right hand. The other bikers spread out, forming a tight circle around James and their leader. Some pulled out chains, while others picked up pieces of James's broken fishing gear to use as weapons. James didn't move from his spot. His eyes tracked every movement around him, just as they had done during countless patrols and missions. He noticed how two of the younger bikers were standing too close to the edge of the dock. He saw how Crusher's stance was unbalanced, affected by the morning's drinking. Every detail was important, just as it had been in combat. "You know what I see?" James spoke calmly. "Despite the dangerous situation, I see 6 men who are about to make a very poor decision." His hands remained loose at his sides, but his body was coiled like a spring, ready to move in any direction. Crusher swung first, throwing a wild haymaker with his brass-knuckled fist. The big biker put all his weight behind the punch, expecting to feel the satisfying crunch of metal against bone. Instead, he felt nothing but air as James smoothly ducked under the swing. Before Crusher could recover his balance, James struck. His open palm hit the bigger man's elbow at precisely the right angle, a move he had learned in close combat training. There was a sharp crack, and the brass knuckles clattered to the dock's wooden planks. 2 of the younger bikers rushed forward, swinging their chains. James moved like water between them, his movements efficient and purposeful. He caught one chain and pulled hard, sending its wielder stumbling into his friend. Both men went down in a tangle of limbs and cursing. Another biker tried to grab James from behind, but 15 years of military training had prepared him for such attacks. James shifted his weight, using his attacker's momentum to flip him over his shoulder. The biker sailed through the air and landed with a splash in the lake. The remaining 2 bikers looked at each other nervously. They had expected an easy morning of bullying a lone fisherman. Instead, they were watching their friends being systematically taken apart by someone who moved with the precision of a trained fighter. Crusher, holding his injured arm, struggled back to his feet. His face was a mask of rage and disbelief. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, spittle flying from his lips. James didn't answer immediately. He was busy dealing with one of the chain-wielding bikers who had managed to get up and was trying for another attack. A quick series of moves, lock, strike, sweep, and the man was back on the dock's wooden planks, groaning and clutching his side. The sound of splashing came from the lake as the biker who had gone overboard struggled to stay afloat, his leather vest and boots weighing him down. His panicked cries for help added to the chaos on the dock. Through it all, James maintained the same calm demeanor he had shown all morning. His breathing was steady, his movements controlled. He had been in far worse situations during his tours of duty. Compared to dodging bullets and IEDs in Afghanistan, handling a group of drunk bikers was almost straightforward. The morning sun now highlighted the scene clearly: 3 bikers on the ground, 1 in the water, and 2 more backing away slowly, their earlier bravado completely gone. The only sound was the heavy breathing of the fallen bikers and the desperate splashing from the lake. The peaceful fishing spot had become a battlefield, and in less than a minute, the outcome had been decided. But the confrontation wasn't over yet. Crusher was still standing, and his pride wouldn't let him accept defeat so easily. The morning air was filled with groans and the sound of water splashing as the biker in the lake continued to struggle. James knew he had to end this situation quickly before someone got seriously hurt. His military training had taught him that even a one battle needed a proper conclusion. "Someone help me," the biker in the water shouted, his leather vest and boots making it hard for him to stay afloat. His tough guy image was completely gone now, replaced by genuine fear. James made a quick decision. He turned to the 2 bikers who were still standing. "Help your friend out of the water," he ordered, using the same commanding voice that had led soldiers through dangerous missions. "Now." Something in his tone made them obey without question. They rushed to the edge of the dock and reached out to their struggling friend. As they helped pull him up, water poured from his clothes and his teeth chattered from the cold morning air. Crusher, still holding his injured arm, watched this scene with growing anger. His reputation was being destroyed right in front of his eyes. With a roar of rage, he charged at James like a wounded bull, throwing all his remaining strength into one desperate attack. James sidestepped smoothly, years of hand-to-hand combat training taking over. As Crusher stumbled past, James grabbed the back of his vest and used the bigger man's own momentum to guide him. The biker gang leader found himself face first against one of the dock's wooden posts. "Stay down," James advised quietly. "Your arm needs medical attention and your friends need help." But Crusher wasn't finished. Despite his injured arm and bruised face, he pushed himself away from the post. "Who do you think you are?" he spat out, blood trickling from his nose. "Do you know who I am? I'm the president of the Steel Demons." James looked at him calmly. "And I was a staff sergeant in the Army Rangers, with 4 tours in Afghanistan." His voice wasn't boastful, just matter of fact. "I fought against men who were trying to kill me and my team with bullets and bombs. You really want to continue this?" The effect of these words was immediate. The bikers who were still conscious looked at James with new understanding. They had heard stories about Rangers, elite soldiers trained in the deadliest forms of combat. Suddenly, their morning of bullying had turned into something far more serious. One of the younger bikers, who had been helping his friend from the water, spoke up. "Crusher, maybe we should just go. This isn't worth it, man." The morning sun cast long shadows across the dock as everyone waited for Crusher's response. The leader of the Steel Demons looked around at his defeated gang. 3 men groaning on the ground, 1 soaking wet and shivering, and 2 others looking ready to run away. Blood continued to drip from Crusher's nose onto his vest. His right arm hung uselessly at his side where James had struck it. But more than his physical injuries, it was his pride that had taken the biggest hit. "My arm," Crusher finally muttered, the fight going out of him. "I think it's broken." James nodded. "It's dislocated. I can help set it, but you'll need to get it checked at a hospital." He stepped forward, his movements still careful but now less threatening. "Will you let me help?" The other bikers watched in surprise as their mighty leader slowly nodded. The same man they had come to bully was now offering to help them. It was a turn of events none of them had expected. James moved with professional efficiency, carefully examining Crusher's arm. "This will hurt," he warned, "but it's better than leaving it dislocated. On 3. 1. He reset the arm with a quick movement before reaching 2. Crusher's yell echoed across the lake, but when it was done, he could move his arm again. The relief on his face was clear, though he tried to hide it behind his usual tough expression. The mood on the dock had changed completely. The morning's violence had been replaced by an uneasy truce, built on newfound respect and the realization that they had severely underestimated the quiet fisherman. The morning was growing warmer as the sun climbed higher in the sky. The dock, which had been a battlefield just minutes ago, was now quiet except for the heavy breathing of the bikers and the gentle lapping of water against the wooden posts. James looked at the scattered remains of his fishing gear, the broken tackle box, the spilled bait, and his fishing rod that had somehow survived the fight. But instead of anger, he felt a familiar feeling, the same one he had when training new recruits in the army. "Sit down, all of you," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "You too, Crusher. That arm needs to rest." To his surprise, they obeyed, forming a rough circle on the dock. The biker who had fallen in the lake was still shivering, so James walked to his truck and returned with an old army blanket. "Thanks," the wet biker mumbled, wrapping himself in the blanket. His tough guy image was completely gone now, replaced by something that reminded James of the young soldiers he used to train. "Let me tell you something," James began, standing before the group of seated bikers. "In Afghanistan, I led a team of 12 men. Every day, we faced real enemies, people who wanted to kill us. But you know what kept us alive?" He paused, making eye contact with each biker. Respect. Respect for our training, respect for each other, and respect for the situation. Crusher, holding his recently reset arm, looked up. "What's your point?" he asked, but his usual aggressive tone was missing. "My point is," James continued, "that strength isn't about intimidation. It's not about making others fear you. Real strength is about protection and responsibility." He picked up one of the empty beer cans that littered the dock. "This morning, you came here looking to prove how tough you were by bullying someone who just wanted to fish in peace." The younger bikers looked down at the wooden planks, shame visible on their faces. Even Crusher seemed to be listening intently now. "I could have hurt you all badly," James said matter-of-factly. "My training gave me that ability. That's not what strength is for. In the Rangers, we learned that the more capable you are of violence, the more important it is to be peaceful." One of the younger bikers raised his hand slightly, like a schoolboy. "Is that why you helped set Crusher's arm? Even after we, you know?" James nodded. "In combat, I've treated injured enemies. Because once the fighting stops, we're all just people." He looked at their motorcycles in the parking lot. "You got machines built for freedom, but you're using them to take freedom away from others." The morning was fully bright now, and a few early fishermen had gathered at the parking lot, watching the scene on the dock with curiosity. The bikers' reputation in the area was well known, and seeing them sitting quietly, listening to a lone man, was something unusual. "So what now?" Crusher asked, his voice quieter than before. "You gonna call the cops?" James shook his head. "No, but I am going to ask her something." He looked at each of them again. "Next weekend, I'm helping at the Veterans Center in town. They're having a motorcycle rally to raise funds for wounded soldiers. I think the Steel Demons should be there." The bikers looked at each other in surprise. This wasn't the punishment they had expected. "You want us to help at a charity event?" one of them asked incredulously. "Yes," James replied. "Show people that your strength can be used for something good. Maybe some of those veterans could even join your group. Real warriors, looking for a new brotherhood." A thoughtful look crossed Crusher's face. Despite his throbbing arm and wounded pride, something about James' words seemed to reach him. The idea of turning his gang into something more meaningful, something respected for the right reasons, started to take root in his mind. The morning's events had taken an unexpected turn. What had started as a confrontation was becoming something else, a lesson in strength, respect, and the possibility of redemption. The following weekend arrived bright and sunny at the Veterans Center. James stood in the parking lot, helping to set up tables and chairs for the motorcycle rally. He wasn't sure if the Steel Demons would actually show up, but he had hope that his words had made an impact. At exactly 10 a.m., the familiar rumble of motorcycles filled the air. This time, though, it wasn't just 6 bikes, it was closer to 20. Crusher led the group, his arm now properly bandaged after a hospital visit. Behind him rode not only his original gang members but also several new faces. "Didn't think we'd show up, did you, Sergeant?" Crusher called out as he parked his bike. His voice carried none of the mockery from their first meeting. Instead, there was a hint of respect, maybe even a little pride in proving James wrong. James walked over to greet them, noticing the changes in their appearance. The Steel Demons still wore their leather vests, but they had cleaned up. No alcohol in sight, and their usual hostile expressions were replaced with something more purposeful. "We, brought some friends," one of the younger bikers said, gesturing to the new faces. "Turns out some of our regular customers at the bike repair shop are veterans. When we told them about the rally, they wanted to join." Among the new riders were 3 former Marines, 2 Air Force veterans, and even a retired Navy SEAL. They had their own motorcycles and their own stories, but today they were riding with the Steel Demons. "And that's not all," Crusher added, reaching into his saddlebag. He pulled out an envelope thick with cash. "We passed the hat around at our usual spots. Figured if we're gonna do this, might as well do it right." James opened the envelope and found over $2,000 in donations. The money would help provide counseling and support services for local veterans struggling to adjust to civilian life. The Veterans Center director came out to see what was happening. Her eyes widened at the sight of the notorious Steel Demons standing in her parking lot. But before she could worry, Crusher stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said, showing unexpected politeness, "we're here to help. Just tell us what needs doing." For the next several hours, the Steel Demons worked alongside the veterans. They helped set up booths, served food, and shared stories with former soldiers. The bikers learned about real combat experiences, while the veterans found a new appreciation for the brotherhood of the road. One particularly touching moment came when the wet biker from the dock incident, whose name was Tommy, spent an hour talking to a young veteran suffering from PTSD. Tommy shared how his own brother had struggled after returning from Iraq, and how riding motorcycles had helped him find peace. James watched all this from the sidelines, helping where needed but mostly observing the transformation. The same men who had tried to bully him a week ago were now showing their better nature. It reminded him of how his own military service had transformed him from a directionless young man into someone who could make a difference. "Hey, Sergeant," Crusher called out during a quiet moment. He walked over to James, looking somewhat uncomfortable. "About last week, I've been thinking. Maybe the Steel Demons need a new direction. These vets, they understand brotherhood like we do, but they use it for something better." James nodded, understanding what Crusher was trying to say. "Sometimes the toughest battles we fight are with ourselves," he replied. "Deciding to change, to be better, that takes real courage." The other bikers gathered around as Crusher continued. "We were wondering, would you consider being an advisor to our group? Help us set up regular events with the Veterans Center. Maybe teach us some of those moves you used on us." He grinned at the last part, showing he could now laugh at his own defeat. The Veterans Center parking lot had become more than just a gathering place for a charity event. It had become the birthplace of something new, a place where 2 different kinds of brotherhood were coming together, learning from each other, and finding a better path forward. 6 months had passed since that fateful morning at Miller's Dock. The early spring air was crisp as James pulled his truck into the familiar parking lot. This time, he wasn't alone. 5 motorcycles were already parked there, the riders setting up fishing gear along the dock. "Morning, Sergeant." Crusher called out cheerfully. He was wearing the same leather vest, but now it had a new patch sewn on the back, a combination of the Steel Demons logo and a military service ribbon. Under it were the words, "Veterans Brotherhood." The Steel Demons had changed dramatically over the past months. They still rode their motorcycles and looked tough, but their reputation in the community had completely transformed. Instead of being known for causing trouble, they were now recognized for their work with veterans and community service. "Brought coffee for everyone," James said, lifting a large thermos. "And this time, I don't expect anyone to throw it in the lake. This brought laughs from the group, including Tommy, who had become one of the most dedicated members of their Veterans Outreach program. Every Sunday morning, weather permitting, members of the Steel Demons would gather at Miller's Dock for what they called fishing therapy. They would bring veterans who needed peace and companionship, teaching them the simple joy of fishing that James had discovered after his own return from war. "You know," Crusher said as he helped James unload his fishing gear, "I never properly thanked you for that day. You could have just beaten us up and called the cops. Instead, you showed us a better way." James smiled as he watched 2 young veterans, recently returned from overseas, learning to bait their hooks under Tommy's patient instruction. "Sometimes people just need a chance to be their better selves," he replied. The dock had become a symbol of their transformation. The same planks that had witnessed their fight now supported a brotherhood of bikers and veterans, helping each other heal and grow. The Steel Demons had even raised money to help maintain the dock and stock the lake with fish. "Hey, Sergeant," one of the younger bikers called out, "tell the new guys about the time you took down 6 bikers without breaking a sweat." It had become a favorite story among the group, though the details seemed to get more impressive with each telling. James shook his head with a smile. "Better yet, why don't we tell them about last month's fundraiser? The one where the Steel Demons raised $10,000 for the Veterans Medical Fund." Pride showed on every biker's face at the mention of their achievement. The gang that had once terrorized the local area was now its strongest supporter of veteran causes. They still looked intimidating in their leather vests, but now they used that tough image to protect and support those who needed help. As the morning progressed, more vehicles arrived, a mix of motorcycles and cars bringing veterans and their families to the dock. What had started as a small Sunday gathering had grown into a regular community event. There was even a grill set up in the parking lot for afternoon cookouts. "Sometimes I can't believe this is the same place," Tommy said, standing next to James as they watched the dock fill with people. "You know, that morning changed all our lives. Not just because you showed us up, but because you showed us what real strength looks like." James cast his line into the water, enjoying the peaceful moment. The sound of gentle conversation and occasional laughter mixed with the lapping of waves against the dock. This was what he had been looking for that morning 6 months ago, not just peace and quiet, but a sense of purpose and community. Next week's the big Veterans Motorcycle Rally, Crusher reminded everyone. "Steel Demons are leading the ride this year. Sure you won't join us on a bike, Sergeant?" James looked at his truck, then at the line of motorcycles. "Maybe it's time I learned to ride," he said thoughtfully. "After all, you taught me that sometimes the best changes in life come from unexpected places." The morning sun reflected off the lake's surface, creating a golden sparkle on the water. Miller's Dock had become more than just a fishing spot. It was now a place of healing, friendship, and second chances, proof that sometimes the worst confrontations can lead to the best transformations.